Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My guest today, Myriam Hadnes. She is a facilitation evangelist. She has a PhD in behavioral economics. She is very smart, as she has told me, and now she gets to be herself. I'm so excited to chat with her. Those of you that have listened to the podcast for a while, you know that at SME Strategy, we facilitate strategic planning. Myriam is a facilitator, talks about facilitation, has lived facilitation, and she is calling from the other side of the world. So, Myriam, I'm excited to chat with you today, both professionally and personally. Welcome to the Strategy and Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much for this lovely introduction.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you, how you got to where you are now, academia or non-academia, and we'll get into some questions.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm a recovering academic. Started in behavioral economics, lived in Vietnam for 3 years, where I think facilitated for the first time without knowing it. Coming into a classroom, getting aware that the students had read the textbook already. And I was like, what can they learn from me now? And then realized that I have to use a more creative way to connect the content with the students. So I used classroom experiments, case studies, and fun ways, role plays, to connect them. Fast forward, came back to Europe, worked in university strategy, bottom-up strategy, learned the skills of facilitation, still didn't know the word of facilitation, quit my job. And as an act of finding myself, hosted idea parties as a meetup. Come with a problem, we brainstorm solutions. And I designed an entire process around it, where we brainstormed questions instead of answers. Because how can you know an answer to someone's problem you met 5 minutes ago? And how willing are you to listen to someone's ideas when you met them only 5 minutes ago and it's a real challenge that you're presenting? So we brainstormed questions. We had a pre-mortem. So what can we do to fail this challenge for sure? And people really liked it, and then started to approach me and asked me if I can help them with workshop design. And when the first time someone asked me to design a workshop to pay me €1,000 that I didn't even have to host, I'm like, oh, there's something to that facilitation business. And then I read Priya Parker's book, learned about the term facilitator, and since then proudly wear the label. That's
Cool.
me in a nutshell.
I love that. And then how much of your work do you do? Mostly design thinking workshops, problem solving workshops? Do you do like the education piece? What keeps you busy on most days?
Nowadays, I train facilitation, which is very meta. And I facilitate workshops for facilitators, even more meta. I started a community called Never Done Before because I realized there's so many facilitators out there who are very creative. They have so many ideas that no client would ever pay them for. So I basically created a playground for facilitators. And I started an agency where we train workshops on topics like psychological safety, how to give feedback, unconscious bias. So more training workshops.
Interesting. And I think it's my reflection, and we started the call saying, we found out about another agency, similar, different, that does facilitation training. And I'm calling from Vancouver. A lot of our clients are in North America. I can help but be curious to ask the question about the approach to facilitation where potentially, and I'm also a European citizen, my family's French, I'm very familiar, so I can make a judgment, is the United States more focused on, let's call it consulting, giving the answers or asserting that they know best in that 5 minutes, whereas Europeans potentially having a history, a background, an ever-expanding knowledge and diaspora of communities that would not be so, I'll use the word, maybe arrogant or confident that they would know the answers, that potentially supports a greater playground for design thinking, curiosity, challenging one's beliefs in a safety environment. I don't know if that's worth passing down, but that is my reflection. So, question to you, how do you feel, or how has the act of teaching facilitation, and dare I say educating the world on the nature of facilitation, how's that been for you? What have been your learnings, your ahas, and your surprises along the journey?
Mm. I think so. I started training facilitation rather late, and as an outcome of having interviewed over 200 facilitators on my podcast and having built the facilitation community. Because what I realized there is that while we are all doing the same things, basically, we're doing the same activities. We do the 1, 2, 4 alls. We do the fish bowls and the world cafes and the talking sticks and sitting in the circle and you name it. And still, there is not one way to facilitate, because the rise and the fall of a well-facilitated process or workshop comes and goes with the facilitator holding the space. So I think the key for training facilitation is actually not teaching some activities or how to run a design thinking process. Go and buy a book, watch a YouTube video. What you cannot learn from a book or YouTube video is all the inner work, how to stop judging your participants, because you will. How to stop getting triggered by this one person who reminds you of your mom, belittling you, and then you just want to shout at them, but you cannot because you're the facilitator. So how to deal with all this kind of inner stuff that comes up as soon as you are confronted with a group dynamic, and how to hold back your own opinions and perceptions, because of course we are not neutral. We are not born neutral. But as a facilitator, you own the process. The group owns the result. That's very different to a consultant, right? So consultant owns the result because that's what they get paid for. As a facilitator, as much as we love to know what's best, that's not what we are there for. So how can we stay curious and fall in love with the groups and fall in love with the problem so that we can support them.
I love that. And so interesting, just again, like, it's no surprise that your perspectives are giving me self-reflection, because, inherently you can't stop facilitating even if you're not trying to. But right, I got the fortune of doing a lot of work with Landmark and working on myself such that I can enter a conversation with anybody at anytime about anything and be unmessable, was the kind of like language there. But I didn't necessarily consider that others that might be facilitating, in our company has that same capacity. And I think that that's one of the interesting dynamics within organizations, and why they truly need facilitators is because they are working together so frequently, and that over time, those little bits of resistance to one another start building and building and building. And then a good facilitator can come in, not knowing anything about that group, so to speak, and support them in accomplishing the desired result despite any kind of interpersonal boundaries, or working through those interpersonal pieces of resistance. So can you speak to how a facilitator and how you as a facilitator supports groups in overcoming those interpersonal challenges that might exist within a group dynamic towards whatever the end result is?
Yeah. Great question. Thank you. I think it starts with, there's several components. It starts with flattening the room. I think one of the key things a good facilitator does is to removing hierarchy as soon as possible. Because when we come together to work together on a process, on a result that we collectively own, every idea is equal. So flattening the room, and we do this by, I think, being in a circle is one thing where everyone is the same. Zoom makes it very easy. I usually don't do, I don't treat anyone in the room differently. And I like little activities such as introduce yourself with your name, and if you had a superpower, what would it be? Asking everyone to share a superpower really shows the humanness of everyone. And this is then number 2. I think after flattening the room is to help all participants to see the human in each other. So for instance, for a client recently, I hosted a workshop where they came together with their client and to debrief on a project that was extremely messy and was at the end 2 million more expensive than expected. And obviously they were blaming each other for it. So we started with a one-on-one conversation. How is it to be you in this project? And it was mind-blowing. Took not even 10 minutes. And suddenly they saw the human in each other and they realized, so they started first in pairs and then they went into groups of 4. And within 15 minutes, they realized that, we all complain about the same things. We all suffer about the same stuff. We're actually on the same side and we are trying to solve the same problem. Bam. Now we can start working. So basically, as a facilitator, the next step is to show them that there is a higher goal that brings them all together so that they're all on the same side. So I think this is on a group level, first flattening the room, bringing in the human side, and then showing that they have to work together to achieve this shared goal they have.
So,
and then
go ahead. Sorry.
One more,
Yeah.
and I think that's maybe the most important and linked to the humanness is absolute authenticity. And so for me, maybe the biggest challenge of being a facilitator for many is to be absolutely authentic themselves. Because the moment where I judge myself so much that I have to wear a mask and to pretend to be someone, this kind of professional person who knows it all and who got their shit together. I have to wear this mask. What I signal to the group is that they have to wear a mask as well. The moment where I accept myself as I am authentic, I present myself as myself, I also give them permission to be themselves. And authenticity breeds trust.
I mean, so well said. And I think that my next question was going to be around building trust and human behaviors. As much as all leaders would love to imagine that everybody in their organization is a cog in a wheel and that it's a one size fits all for all people and that they should just do their jobs because they're paid to do their jobs. There is the human aspect of the work. And of course, seeing the human in each other is critical, but also recognizing, or at least I have the belief, and I believe we have the shared belief, that at the heart of organizations are human beings. And so as much as you could read a book and say, I have read a book, I understand the subject matter, I have a process, therefore I can facilitate it, is flawed because there are so many more intricate components to, I will say, being a good facilitator. Like, I think anybody can facilitate, but I think there's the difference between working through the material and getting the 100%. Breakthrough as a group. Can you, I guess it's 2 parts. One, your distinction of the material versus the people and what really creates the breakthrough. And then the other is human behavior at the root of psychological safety, or I guess psychological safety. Yeah. Take that how you will.
Okay, content versus process, right? It's and people. So I think it is important to design a process that has a high likelihood of getting the group from the state of confusion to clarity to ultimately action. And that's a craft that we can learn. So you know where you want to land. So what is the next step that you need to achieve in order to land there? And then you can solve the problem basically through backward induction and pick the right activities that stitch it all together. Easy. Then you step into the room and you realize that actually what the group needs to talk about has nothing to do with what you were briefed on. And there goes the process. And I think you get to break through moments where you are attuned to the needs of the group in that moment. Because at the end of the day, you can bring the horse to the water hole, but you cannot force it to drink. So yes, you can have the best process in the world, and you can have the need for this outcome. But if in the group there's there are animosities, or their headspace is taken by something else, or they have for instance, if a team leader asks for a team building workshop, oh, we just want to have fun because we have these cases of burnout or silent quitting, and I really want the team to come together and have a fun day. And then you bring them together and you realize that actually they're suffering from burnout and silent quitting because they're lacking processes and the roles and responsibilities are not clear. So what they actually need is clarity. Maybe they need a team leader who takes a decision. And then a good facilitator stands there in the fire and says, okay, I know that we wanted to play bowling, but what if we use the figures to do a little bit of a map of our team and what we need from each other?
The difference between what they wanted versus what they needed, and being in tune and aware. And I want to highlight the willing to stand in that space to say, okay, I will be the one to say, here's what I see. Do you see the same thing? Would this be valuable? And the ability to pivot, change, and drive forward to that next place.
Yeah, and I think there are two things. One is preparation. So before I host a workshop for a client, I interview every single participant who will be in this workshop. And I take and I make it as easy as possible for them to book a slot. And these interviews are maybe 15 minutes long, but I will find out what it is that really matters and why they think they show up, why they want to show up, and what they think they can bring, and all the stuff that went wrong in the past. So when I step into the room, I usually have quite a good understanding of what needs to happen. And still, I think a good facilitator can hold silence and can interpret silence so that we can speak to what we observe or what we sense where the group does dare to. Because I think before a breakthrough moment, and you might know this from Landmark, there's always this silence or and then people in their heads. And if it's not an individual journey, like in the coaching, but if it's a team journey, everyone is in their head and there's something that needs to be spoken, that needs to be made explicit. And I think that's the role of a facilitator, to make the implicit explicit.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Let me ask, I'll go back to my kind of first question, and I'm hoping that I would say selfishly learned something that I wouldn't consider, but truly in the vein of being curious. You have a PhD in behavioral economics. I alluded to psychological safety and human beings at the heart of it. We've already talked about the difference between what people think they want and what they actually need. What would you say is the one thing that has surprised you in conversations with folks, kind of leaning on your educational background, that contributes to these teams being able to have those silent aha moments or those individual aha moments for themselves, as it relates to forming as a group? And I know that was potentially a convoluted question, but hopefully the path makes sense.
I just share what comes to my mind, and then I hope that it will answer your question.
Excellent.
And I have no idea whether this has anything to do with me having studied human behavior and human dynamics. And I guess maybe so. What I observe is that, especially with psychological safety, and this comes back to the masks we're wearing. In most interactions in the professional space, and unfortunately even in the personal space, people are constantly busy with hiding what they don't know, hiding their fears, covering up. And what it leads to is a space where nobody really dares to ask a question. Nobody really dares to say anything. And so everyone is kind of tiptoeing around, and then there are a few who just show off and with lots of self-confidence. And the small things that lead to more psychological safety and better team dynamics is vulnerability and authenticity, and the vulnerability of asking a question, and the vulnerability to say, I don't know, maybe you do. And I think as a leader or as a facilitator, you can promote that by the way you respond to whatever is shared and presented in the room. The improv theater principles: yes and all offers, and always make your partner look good. Don't need more. So I think and there's been research that showed that there is one word when you transcribe the conversation between two people, and at the end you ask them how enjoyable the conversation was and how much they like their partner. There's one word that makes a difference. It's the word "and," because the word "and" connects ideas, builds on each other. And I think when we reply to other people more with "yes, and," even if we then contradict, we help the person to feel good about themselves because they feel seen. And the yes doesn't need to mean that we agree. Mm. It's just a sign of acknowledging. I acknowledge that you said something, and I add my own thoughts. And this makes all the difference.
I think, well, it was interesting as you were sharing that, like you had demonstrated that perfectly. I asked a question, it was a hypothesis in my mind, and you so brilliantly and vulnerably say, well, I think I understand your question, and I'm going to build on it. And if I don't get to the outcome, then I'm not gonna, we'll discuss it at that point. And it's the space that in this case we have an agreement that is we're going to dance, we're going to build off each other. But in organizations where there's either a time crunch, where there's a revenue crunch, where there's external pressures, you might lose sight of you are in partnership with the person that you're talking to. You explicitly have an agreement to work together, but you kind of forget about it implicitly because you're there. And then so it occurs as a me versus you, and who needs to be right and who needs to get forward versus how do we put our shared consciousness, shared beliefs, shared understanding in a session to try to come up with something like the best answer so that we can both move forward towards whatever that shared outcome is. In the day-to-day work, it sometimes get lost. And I think that as a facilitator is a joy that you get to say, we are in this space to co-create, to collaborate on some sort of shared outcome. How can we put all of our perspectives together, recognize that we are humans in the process, flawed and all, and celebrate our flaws, and ultimately move forward as a collective towards whatever we need to move forward on, whether that's relationships, design thinking, or making a whole bunch of money. Thoughts?
Yeah. Thank you. I agree, and I think that's a beauty, as you say, of facilitation, that we can change the rules of the game for this time that we are spending with a group, and maybe gives them a glimpse of a better way to communicate with each other. And then if they're going back into the organizations, yeah, many organizations are toxic. And in many organizations, people don't start with a yes and, but they start with a no, that's a stupid idea. Haven't you read my email? So all this passive aggressiveness of blaming and shaming, and then it becomes a vicious circle. And I think someone has to break that, and that must be the leadership. And I think what we don't focus enough on in organizational development is the role of a manager. In order to create psychological safety for others, you need to have it for yourself. And I remember I was a PhD student, had to prepare a problem set in econometrics, which was extremely complicated. I went to my supervisor before going to the master students, and said, don't understand with the results. Can you explain, please? He said, oh, sure, that's so easy. All you have to do is blah, blah, blah. I didn't understand a word. And I was so intimidated because he was, oh, yeah, sure, it was so easy. All you have to do is, I didn't want to look stupid in front of him. So what happens, I go to the master students. Of course, one of them asked me the exact same question. And me, mid-20, what do I reply? Oh, that's so easy. All you have to do is. Nobody ever asked me a question again. Mm-hmm. I destroyed the psychological safety in the space as much as my supervisor destroyed it for me, because I wasn't open for them to actually admit that they don't know. I made them feel stupid. Today would say, oh, you know what? It's actually a good question. I asked the same my supervisor. I'm sure someone here in the room can answer that. And then someone would have had the solution. But I was so ashamed. I was so in my imposter syndrome that all these master students are so much smarter than I am that I didn't even dare to admit it. And I think for managers, it's very often the same. They have so much to do. They have so much burden on their shoulders, and everyone suffers from imposter syndrome. So if you believe that you're not as good as you should be, and you should have been better prepared, and you should know all the answers, and then someone comes with a question, irrelevant. Why are you asking this question anyway? We don't have time for that. Boom. Destroyed all the psychological safety. And the one difference would be, oh, thank you for bringing that up. What do you think about it?
Not intentionally leaving a pause, but it is pause worthy. So for those listening, which is obviously if you're listening and you're hearing me, you're listening. It's just like, hey, like, how do you respond when people bring stuff up to you? And what is the culture of your organization? Is it one where you need to have all the answers, which is exhausting? Or is it vulnerable enough that you can reflect and say, oh, that's a really good question. Let's investigate it together. Let's be curious. And one of the things that I considered around the vicious circle was the nice thing about a facilitator is that you can remove those constraints. And like in a conversation, you can, if only artificially, remove the constraints that people might see on themselves or the belief that they need to have all the answers. Imagine you didn't have all the answers right away. What could you say? What might you say? What could be possible? And then people start unlocking that part of their belief, and then they can actually rewire themselves as a group to say, oh my gosh, it would be nice. Wouldn't it be nice if we did that? It looked like you had a reflection, and then we'll have to kind of finish up after this, despite the fact we could talk for hours. What was the thing that popped into your head, Myriam?
You said that, so 100% to all that you said. And you said it's exhausting if you think you need to have all the answers. And I would go even a step further. It's dangerous. It's dangerous that you have the impression you need to have all the answers, because A, it means you hired the wrong people. And B, if you're relying only on the answers that one person can produce, how competitive will you be in the next year or decade? So I think organizations who are not thinking about psychological safety, who are not actively building this culture where people ask for support, don't know the answer, and collaborate with each other, they're doomed to fail if you don't have that.
So everybody needs a facilitator. Everybody needs to have facilitators internally. Everybody needs to have a facilitation mindset versus a consultative mindset. Or do you? I don't know. That wouldn't be a very good facilitator if I just said my direct thing. Myriam, as we finish up, are there any other kind of thoughts you'd like to leave with our audience? Where can people connect with you? And if they are curious about asking better questions, being better facilitators, learning, some of the things that you've learned, where can they connect with you?
Thank you. One thing I want to share, the last thing, is you don't have to be a capital F facilitator to facilitate. I think every manager needs to learn how to facilitate at least a bit, to step out of the micromanaging burden into leadership. And the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I think the connect and find out about Never Done Before. That's the community I run with courses and an academy and workshops.work for my podcast and client work.
Excellent. 260 something episodes and counting, if memory serves. I think that's phenomenal. Myriam, it's been, as I hoped, a sincere pleasure, a wonderful conversation, a nice thought dance. And I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. It was truly a pleasure. And thank you for spending time with our people today.
Thank you so much.
Folks, my guest, Myriam Hadnes. One of the things I'm taking away just in closing, you do not need to have the title of a facilitator to be a facilitator. It is the mindset of hopefully unlocking those around you by removing the responsibility from yourself. So imagine how good it could feel by not having the rest of the answers, which in turn requires a vulnerability to not be the one. But if you are the one, then so much rests on you. So how can you bring that to the rest of your team? Not only would it help you feel better, it'll help your team have better results and support ultimately the accomplishment that you want to have. I can't underscore the importance of potentially using a facilitator in your strategy work or in your team work or in your problem solving work, either virtually or in person with a company like Myriam's or our own. But really, there's so much on the other side of a good conversation. You don't know what you can do for a person's well-being by freeing them of those constraints. And so Myriam and I both believe that facilitation, and from my side, strategic planning, can change the world and can change a person's life. So it's fun and a great responsibility. So Myriam, thank you again. It's been such a pleasure. And folks, this has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, just give us a subscribe or a like or do whatever the kids do these days just to help us help more people and support our global audience. So my name is Anthony Taylor. This has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. And as always, I'll see you next time.